They did it. They actually did it. The One Piece live action is good. So starting off here, this video is coming out a little late in respective to the One Piece live action, which dropped on August 31st. But I wanted to emphasize how great of an achievement it is for the One Piece live action to actually be good. It's crazy, man. So anime live actions aren't known to be the best of adaptations. You know, you have the Death Note adaptation, which yeah, not the best of adaptations, you know, conceived by a certain company. But you also have things like the Bleach adaptation, which I've also heard is actually pretty decent to, you know, low okayness. But definitely considered the worst out of the anime adaptations was Dragon Ball Evolution, which you know, kind of falls flat of everything Dragon Ball is, not only aesthetic wise but also acting wise.
I made a promise that I wasn't gonna fight. What? I made a promise that I'm not gonna fight. Oh.
But I really like to say that the One Piece live action actually embodies the heart of the original series. Like, as I got halfway through watching it, and I'm like, they nailed the Straw Hats, dude. Like, they did them really well. So I'd like to bring attention to the actors a part of this series, because as you know, there's an actors and writers strike happening in America right now. And dude, the whole cast like nailed it, dude. Like, I can't name a single cast member who I'd say fell short. So the first Straw Hat I would like to talk about is Luffy. So Iñaki Godoy does a really good portrayal of Luffy. I was a little skeptic, right, when the trailer first dropped, and you know, a lot of us were skeptic on how Iñaki's portrayal would be for Luffy. Like, is he gonna do this line correctly? Is he gonna say this correctly? Is he gonna, you know, feel like Luffy? But I'd like to say Iñaki's portrayal as Luffy is one of the best parts of this show. Like, he absolutely nailed the character of Luffy that we all love. I want to bring attention to Emily Rudd, who played Nami, because Nami needed to be the emotional drive we see present in that early part of the anime, you know. But again, I think she absolutely killed it in the role. So enough glazing aside, I want to actually get into some of the changes we get for the One Piece live action, because it's not one-to-one, right? And I don't think that was ever the goal, because if you didn't know, Oda actually worked closely with the showrunner. So a lot of these changes were made for pacing and whatnot, which I think worked for the show's benefit, you know. One Piece isn't really known for being the best paced show. Like, Toei definitely stretches a lot of the later parts of One Piece, like, to its thinnest. I think every fan of One Piece can admit that it's not the best, you know, paced show. But I think the live action fixes a lot of the issues found in the anime. Not to say that early One Piece is paced bad technically, but I think it's a lot easier for new fans to be introduced to the story of One Piece in a little shorter time frame. And of course, in some parts, like later I'll talk about Baratie, like some parts, the longer aspects of them work to the character's benefit. But for the most part, like, I think East Blue, to sell it, right, to sell it to everyone, right, I think it needed to be a little fast paced. So starting off in the episode 1 of the show, we actually get some interesting changes. So Zoro gets introduced way quicker than he did in the anime and in the manga. They actually show, and I loved it, they actually showed a scene that we learn about in Alabasta of Zoro versus Mr. Seven, and it's sick, man. Like, it's a sick introduction to Zoro, and we actually, I think, on screen get our first confirmed Zoro kill. Like, I'm not joking. Everyone knows One Piece for being that show that kind of doesn't kill off characters that much, but we actually get a scene where Zoro just completely cuts someone in half, and it was a shock. Like, it was crazy. And I noticed this a lot while watching the show, but the show gets really dark. Like, it gets really, like, gritty, especially when we go to, like, Buggy, who, although Buggy is one of my favorite One Piece characters, like, we don't really see him do that many things that I would say are totally sinister or totally evil. But in the live action, like, Buggy has these guys in chains and they're, like, forced to laugh, and it's kind of a cool scene. Like, it's horrible, right? It's horrifying, but it's kind of a cool scene and a cool contrast to Luffy versus in the anime, Luffy kind of just kicks Buggy in the balls, and that's it for Buggy till Log Town. And speaking of Log Town, they actually cut it from the show, which I think was good, because Log Town needs at least 1 to 2 episodes to breathe. Like, Log Town is a pretty heavy arc, for a show. So going after episode 2, right, we get Syrup Village, episodes 3 through 4, I believe, and I think they nailed Syrup Village. Now, there are some changes, more of like scenery changes, because the fights do take place within the village instead of the shore in the anime and manga, but I think it works for the live action. And some people have made complaints that Usopp doesn't really feel to be worthy of being a Straw Hat, which I disagree. I think being a Straw Hat is less of a worthy thing or something to be, like a trial. Like, I think it's more of I think you're cool. This is Luffy speaking. I think you're cool. I want you to be my friend. Come along with me. Like, I think that's all that needs to happen for you to be a Straw Hat, and I think that works for most of the Straw Hats. Now, I do agree some of the changes they did to Usopp. For instance, in the anime, I remember a scene where Usopp has to stop the Kuro pirates from making it to the village, and he kind of gets, his shit rocked and all of that, and he's all bloody and he's all battered. And that's kind of like the scene to tell you that, oh yeah, this guy is, he's a Straw Hat, man. Like he would rather die than give up on his dreams than in there. Like, that is what the scene is there to tell you. And they remove it from the live action, but there still is a really cool, like, standoff scene between him and Kuro. And of course, it kind of lessens it a little bit, but you get the point, right? That Usopp is a type of guy, although he is weak, he will still stand up for what's right. And I think that's enough to portray the character of Usopp. I think Jacob Ramiro does a pretty good job as Usopp in his role. Like, of course he's not one-to-one, of course he doesn't have the long nose, and he's not as, freaked out as anime Usopp would, which is more of a gag thing, kind of like an actual way someone would act, Despite those deviations from the original character, I still think he embodies who Usopp is, especially in these early parts of One Piece. So I think kudos to him. I forgot to mention earlier that there is a pretty big change while Luffy and Zoro are in Shell's Town. So Luffy meets Nami and Zoro in the same time frame, which, in my opinion, it kind of doesn't work, especially towards Luffy and Zoro's relationship. Don't get me wrong, it wins me over by the time we get to Baratie, but like, I think the best part about Luffy and Zoro's early relationship is that while he's being strung up in the yard, and Luffy just sees the type of guy Zoro is. I mean, even just off a couple interactions, I kind of love that about their early interactions, because they don't know each other, but they still understand, like, okay, this guy's ambitions are just as great as mine. So I don't know, it just really worked for me in early Shell's Town that, Luffy and Zoro are this duo that make their way out of that island, just the two of them. Someone I'd also like to bring attention to for the production side of the One Piece live action is McKinyu, the actor playing Zoro. And again, I think he nailed it. Zoro's kind of always been just this cool character, it's not that much to him, at least early on. I do think Zoro is one of the best written characters in One Piece, but early on, he's kind of just this cool, stoic guy, and I think McKinney portrays that really well. Like, even when you get to the more emotional scenes of Baratie, which I'm about to get to, like, I think he does a really good job selling not only Zoro's ambition, but his reasoning for wanting to follow Luffy. So one of the biggest changes to the One Piece live action is Don Krieg never makes it to Baratie. Like, he's done. Like, they cut to Mihawk during the battle. Like, Garp calls him on a snail phone, and then it cuts to Mihawk and we see his bounty, which, again, amazing scene. But anyway, we see his bounty and we actually see him during the fight, which got off screen in the anime, where we see him fighting Don Krieg and his fleet. And it's a great scene, but we see that then and there, Don Krieg is just finished. Like, he's done. Like, they completely cut him from the show. We do actually see the one guy who escapes. I forgot his name, but he's very important to the plot of Baratie. But we do actually see him at Baratie. He's the only one that makes it, and he gives a little warning to Luffy about the Grand Line, which I think was cool and a good connection to, you know, kind of little cameo for people who watch the anime, really. I do think kind of the side effect of these changes are kind of Luffy's relationship with Sanji, because the whole Don Krieg fight is mainly the reason Sanji joins the crew. Like, there are some changes, which I'll get to in a moment, but, like, Sanji's main thing, and there's a great scene where, like, Zeph is like, I've seen one or two like him before, referring to Luffy. And it's a really cool scene because it tells you a lot about how, you know, Zeph has looked at his life and his life on the sea, and how, yeah, there are these guys, these special people, Sanji, who, you know, have these wills that they'd rather die than, you know, back down from. Like, it's a really cool scene, and I think a lot of that is sort of lost in the live action, which sucks. But I still think as a arc for the live action, I still think Baratie serves its purpose. For instance, the Zoro versus Mihawk fight is still great despite the, you know, plot constraints that were brought upon by, you know, it having to be more fast-paced. But I still think they absolutely nailed the at least emotional beats of the Mihawk versus Zoro fight. And at this point, this kind of cements Zoro. It's still, even in the live action, he's still one of my favorite Straw Hats. Like, absolutely phenomenal portrayal by McKinney. Like, absolutely phenomenal portrayal by Luffy. Like, Luffy's at Zoro's bedside, and it's kind of a sad scene. Like, I was watching this with my parents, and my mom, like, turns to me, and she's like, is Zoro gonna die? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, it was a really sad scene for, you know, not only Luffy, but for Zoro, because we just got the Kuina flashback for Zoro, like, a couple episodes prior. So it's a really emotional thing to, you know, so have Zoro down for the next couple episodes. And of course, you know, we have Nami leaving with Arlong. And speaking of Arlong, Arlong actually shows up earlier in the series. Like, we get him as early as Baratie. Like, instead of the Don Krieg fight happening there, Arlong actually comes in, you know. He puts Luffy down in, you know, the Luffy fashion. And yeah, it's just a really emotional thing that's happening to the Straw Hats at that point, and I think they really nailed that. Speaking of emotions, I really think they nailed the emotional beats for the last couple episodes in Arlong Park. Like, they dedicate, like, an entire episode to the Nami flashback, and I think that was really cool. And we got, you know, that Luffy moment where he's like, I want to talk to Nami. Like, Luffy doesn't really care about the, you know, exposition, which I think Iñaki, you know, portrays in a good way without making Luffy seem kind of like an asshole. But episode 7 ends with us getting the great Straw Hat scene with Nami, and I still think they nailed it. Although it's not as, you know, emotional as we get in the anime, it still hits all those beats and it's still great. Like, it's still an amazing scene. The last change for the live action I'd like to point out was the final episode where we get a battle between Garp and Luffy. And speaking of Garp, we get him as more of a background antagonist throughout these entire series. Like, in the anime, we don't see Garp till Garp play a big role till way later in the series, but we actually get that now in the live action, which I think was a pretty good change, and it made a lot of sense to keep Garp in the spotlight for most of the show. But we actually get a face off between him and Luffy, and it's a really cool scene for, you know, Luffy as a character, because he's like, you know, he's not gonna back down. Like, you can kick Luffy out, you can punch him, you can do whatever you want, but he's not gonna back down. Like, I just think they really nailed that part of Luffy's character and that part of his ambition. But yeah, that's kind of the last sort of change they did. Well, big change. But yeah, I think despite the One Piece live action's flaws, I still think this stands as a pillar to not only the One Piece community and also to the anime community, that a live action adaptation being good is possible. Like, it can be done with the right handling in the right direction, which I think is awesome. But yeah, guys, I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments, and if you really like this video, I can't stress enough, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all of that, and thank you. See you next time.